Hello, everyone. Madeline from Dribbble here. Thank you for joining us. I have been loving seeing where you guys are joining from. It looks like we've got a really international bunch. So thank you for joining. I'd love to know what time it is where you are. Is anyone staying up till the early hours of the morning to join us? Hello. 3 p.m., not too bad. 3 a.m. Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Awesome. Who's been to a Dribbble event before? We run these events every 2 weeks, so I'd love to know if this is your first time or you've been to an event before. Get to know each other in the chat as well. Put your Dribbble usernames in the chat, put your portfolios in the chat. We love to keep this event as engaging as possible. First time for a lot of people, second time for one person. Well, thank you for coming back, and we hope that you come to many more Dribbble events. So welcome, everyone. We are so glad to have you here with us today for our fireside chat with Dribbble CEO Zach Anisko and Logitech's first ever Chief Design Officer, Alastair Curtis. Alastair and Zach will be discussing the importance of design innovation within a company and how Logitech achieved the impossible when it transformed from a company known for mice and keyboards to an award-winning design company. After this fireside chat, there'll be plenty of opportunity for question and answers. So make sure you have your questions and answers ready. You guys are in for a really insightful and engaging conversation. But before we begin, I've got a few housekeeping notes to do, and then we'll kick off momentarily. So like I said, use the chat to get to know each other. Share your thoughts. We love to hear from you guys. There'll be plenty of time for question and answer. So if you do have a question, put it in the question and answer panel. You'll see there's an opportunity to upvote other people's questions as well. So if you see a question that you like, make sure to upvote it. The more votes a question has, the more likely it will to get asked. There'll also be an opportunity for you guys to come up onto stage and ask your questions to Zach and Alastair face to face. If you want to turn your microphone on and your camera on. The way to do that is to raise your hand in the question and answer panel of the tab. So you'll see a hand emoji. That means that you want to come up onto stage and you want to ask a question face to face. If you run into any tech issues or any trouble at all, just flag us in the chat. You could DM us and you could also use the help tab. If you're sharing this on social media, we love to hear your thoughts on social media. We love to see your screenshots. So tag us at Dribbble and tag Logitech at Logitech. This fireside chat's being recorded and it's also streaming out to YouTube on Dribble's YouTube. Thank you to our event platform partners called Welcome. And then finally, Logitech's running the biggest ever playoff on Dribbble. The challenge is to design something inspired by the theme, smaller, smarter, mightier. And you have until the 15th of November to get your entries in. We'll put a link in the tab for you to, with the instructions for you to participate and a link to the prizes. So without further ado, we should kick off this fireside chat. I'd love to introduce you to Alastair Curtis and Zach Anisko. Alastair Curtis is the first ever Chief Design Officer at Logitech, and he's responsible for leading design there. He joined Logitech in 2013 and has been in charge of rethinking and redesigning innovation at the company since, and working towards building a design team and helping establish, nurture a design-led culture. He's got more than 20 years of experience in design innovation. Prior to Logitech, he worked at Nokia as the Chief Designer and Senior Vice President of Nokia and Head of Design and Vice President of Mobile Phones at Nokia before that. And Zach Anisko is Dribbble's CEO and he leads a team from the San Francisco Bay Area. Before Dribbble, Zach began his career 2 decades ago as a web designer before shifting into more business and executive roles at Autodesk, Creative Market, Hired.com, BranchOut, Monster.com, and Tickle.com. He's been responsible for scaling multiple design companies to successful exits over the past decade, including the Creative Market acquisition by Autodesk in 2014 and leading Dribble's acquisition of Creative Market in 2020. We are so excited to have them both here with us today to discuss design innovation and the importance of design within a company in this fireside chat. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Zach and Alastair. Thank you.
Hello, Alastair. How's it going?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for joining us here. This is fun.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to just jump into it. Madeline gave a great intro on your career and bio. Would love to learn more about how you started your design career and what led you to your position you're in now. This is quite the journey.
Yeah, it's quite the journey. It's quite a zigzag journey in the early days, and maybe more straight arrow in the latter years. But actually, when I first, I, I'm not sure I fell into design. That's probably the wrong way to put it. But originally, I wanted to be a professional footballer uh, or soccer player from a. And I was obsessed with soccer. So I didn't really have a career plan because my career plan was to be a pro soccer player. But I soon I found out I wasn't good enough. So it was like, okay, switch gears. And to be honest, I didn't really know where my career was going. I I, I was good at school, but I was never a straight A student. So I was kind of drifted through school, and it wasn't until by chance I was in the woodwork or the design space within school, and an ex-student of the school kit was back meeting the teacher, and just happened to be showing some of the work that he was doing for Philips Design, and I just happened to be there, and I was like, and suddenly for me it was just like this just light bulb moment of like, oh, all of the things I like, all of the things I'm quite good at, kind of are in that space. So that was then suddenly I had purpose, and it was okay. How do I become an industrial designer as quickly as I could? I didn't really have a plan to go to university. Wasn't Going to university wasn't anything my family had done in the past, but so it was a question of how do I become an industrial designer. So originally the plan is you do a foundation course in art, but I've never really been an artist. I've been really first and foremost more creative than an artist. Although I know there are people would say they're one and the same, but at school they felt very different. Um, anyway, I didn't really want to do a foundation course, and I found a very new course in London, a college called Brunel University, and it was the second year of the course. There was only 20, maybe 24 students in the whole cohort. But it was an amazing course where you did internships or long-term internships as part of the course. And what that meant was we were all thrown out into industry in our second year at college, and then we'd come back, and then we'd go back out, and then we'd come back. So it was this blend of everything,
Oh, yeah.
and exposed us to design on so many different companies. And then that just trickled on from there. It was not the best time to be a designer. Economically, it was not a good time. So I decided to try and stay in academia, and I was fortunate enough to go to the Royal College. And then I left the Royal College, and I, in a roundabout way, landed at Nokia. And I spent 16 years at Nokia with amazing people. And I kind of went from being an individual designer to actually recognizing that my skills were, I could design, don't get me wrong, I can design, but my skills were more in leading and creatively directing than necessarily doing. So I gravitated more to the manager, director, leader side than I did as an individual designer. And I kind of was reflecting about it before this call, and I was like thinking, it's almost like full circle to being back to being a soccer player. I loved playing soccer, but I was probably not the best player in some ways. So I was probably almost better as a manager, getting the best out of the team and all those things. And that's kind of where I am now. It's creatively managing and directing versus hands-on doing the design work.
Yeah, that's great. I have a very similar origin story as well. I wanted to be a musician and wasn't that good at it, and ended up falling into design and going to design school, and then after design school, really fell in love with product and growth and the business side, and here I am. But yeah. Love that parallel. Logitech is known widely as a mice and keyboard company. Whose idea was it to create this role of kind of chief design officer at Logitech, and why was the role created? And by the way, long time listener, first time caller. I'm a big fan of Logitech over here.
I've got mine too. um, I mean, it comes down to Bracken. I mean, Bracken's the CEO of Logitech, and I think Bracken, throughout his career, had sort of. I mean, he's not a designer, but I think he'd sort of intersected design throughout his career. And as one of the intersections, I think there was a key intersection for him was he was at Braun and closely aligned with Dieter Rams. And obviously Dieter, sort of in some respects, the godfather of modern day industrial design. And I think Dieter had a huge influence on Bracken and the value of design leadership and design thinking. And then Bracken went on to Whirlpool, and then when he took over at Logitech, he was very clear that he wanted to make design one of the sort of foundations of the new Logitech, or the next transformation of Logitech. And in the early days when Bracken and I met, that's something we talked about is, yes, we will use design to make great products, but let's not stop at making great products. Let's think about how design can be a fundamental change agent in transforming the company and taking the company beyond just being a keyboard and mouse company to where it can go. And in some respects, where it can go is we're still on that journey. And I think both Bracken and I and Bracken's leadership believe that we're on the journey. It's how big can we dream? And yes, we will continue to do amazing mouse, amazing keyboards, and amazing products. But 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how big can we dream and how big can we take this brand?
Yeah. The role itself, what does the day-to-day look like for you? A chief design officer, what does that look like, and what are some of your biggest challenges?
I think the role, it's in some respects, I think, well, first of all, I think chief design officer role varies dramatically from company to company. I don't think they are one and the same from any one company.
Sure.
So I think there's a lot of people believe that the chief design officer is their sort of pencil in hand or mouse in hand designing the next product and finessing and working on the next product. In reality, in my case, my day-to-day challenge is to get out of the way.
Yeah.
It's
as a good manager does.
Yeah, I mean, I have an amazing leadership team and a brilliantly talented team. It's really my job to empower them, and in some respects provide the air cover and space for them to do great work. Fundamentally, that's kind of what my day-to-day is just helping to support and be there for the team. And then in some respects, the other part of the job, which I believe is an important role for a chief designer officer, is as a designer, you're not designing the product per se, but you're helping to design the company.
Yeah.
So it's me partnering Bracken's leadership team, partnering other elements of the company of like, how are we designing the Logitech of tomorrow, and what do we need to be the Logitech of tomorrow? I think that those are the sort of two dimensions of what my day-to-day is.
So in that concept of thinking through designing the company, how do you approach rethinking and redesigning for I guess innovation and just kind of strategy going forward? What does that look like?
I think it's been a journey for design. In the early, as Madeleine said at the start, we as a design, me as a design leader and we as a design organization are 8 years old. So we're not particularly old as a capability, and there was no design before I started. So in the early days, it was really about establishing design as a capability and bringing in just great talent and focusing in many ways on just making better product and designing better product. And if my energy in those days was about being much more not necessarily hands-on, but in the mix of it and making sure we're getting the design right, the thinking right, the products right, the portfolio right. And then we kind of went to design what we would call 2.0, where it's okay, we've got the physical product into a better shape. Now let's start to think about the total experience, the packaging, the software, the full experience. And now we're entering what we would class as design 3.0. And design 3.0 is now looking at design of how design can go past designing the experience that we deliver to the consumer, but how do we use design to rethink the company? How do we use design to rethink how we do things within the company? So as an example, when we're onboarding people into the company, how could we help design that as an amazing experience? from all of the touch points, from working with the P&C, the people and culture department regarding the interview process, the IT department as far as how do we bring computers in. So even that is like, okay, all of the elements there is like, how do we design the better experience? Because fundamentally we're still designing for people. And then the next dimension is, which is where we're also is using design to help creatively think differently about our strategy. And strategies aren't there to be changed every day or every week or every month or even every year. It's sometimes fine tuning them, but it's doing creative exercises to sort of stretch the strategy or think beyond the strategy and go, where could this go? So it's kind of all of those dimensions really as a design team of how we're trying to push the company and stretch the company.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So over the last 8 years, as you've really started to inject and nurture and really become a design-led company, which, by the way, there was an interesting quote I read from McKinsey that said that design-led companies outperform the S&P by 211%.
Yeah.
So there's proof in the pudding there. So good work.
Just on that, I mean, it's great that it's sort of that's how it comes across, I think, for the design industry, because it gives a sense of, I think, credibility to the design industry. I'm not sure it's down to design per se. I actually think it's down to let me back up. I think the important thing is as far as it's down to actually companies obsessing about the consumer and putting the consumer first. And I think that's what design's always been about, understanding consumers and putting the consumer first. So I think ultimately it's not companies that invest in design, it's companies that invest in putting the consumer first, which are the ones which are outperforming the rest. And design is part of that. Don't get me wrong, but I think ultimately it's the consumer obsession that's the important thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's it all starts with the user experience, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So what are some of the major shifts you've seen just over the last almost a decade now as Logitech's become more design centric, or maybe even just externally?
I think well, certainly in Logitech, and we talk about those design phases, design sort of 1.0, 2.0, 3.0.
Yeah.
I think that's, in some respects, those phases are also an acceptance of design within the company. And because when you're not part of the company's culture and you're not part of the company's sort of muscle memory of how you work, to build a design organization in those early days has its challenges. And it's not that people were fighting design, but it's just a challenge of like, okay, how do we fit within the rest of the company and how do we make things work? So I think in the early days, it was gaining traction, gaining trust, and not trying to be an independent body. For me, in the early days, and even now, I think it's really, really important that design doesn't try and be an ivory tower, doesn't try and be sort of an elitist organization. I think the real innovation, real breakthrough, real creativity comes from design, engineering, business, all actually working together. So I think in the early days, for me, it was important to make sure that we gained that trust, that we wanted to work alongside the business, work alongside engineering and co-create. Once you've established that trust, then it's then building on that and expanding your influence and impact. So I think that's the biggest change over the 8 years I've seen is helping design to have a stronger voice and a more confident voice at the table, which has now got permission to sit at. And I would argue that's probably the same externally. I think the companies where design is having value, and we talked about earlier with that obsession with the consumer, that where design's having value is where design is having a seat at the table, and it's learning to be confident to use its voice. Because I think design historically has been a little bit of a service provider versus an intellectual, creative, strategic partner. And I think gaining the confidence to be a strategic partner is probably the most significant, I think, change that the design industry is going through.
And in Logitech, how have you seen kind of the trajectory of the company evolve alongside the evolution of becoming more design centric as these processes come together?
Um,
Is it working? Is it?
yeah, no, it's working.
Yeah,
I mean, it's working amazingly well.
yeah,
And it's unfair of me to be so not necessarily negative, but sort of more reflective as far as could it be better? Yes. Um, is where we are where we are today perfect? Maybe in some ways, but no, not nowhere near enough. I I, I, I want design to be constantly looking at itself and asking itself, are we doing the best we can do for the company? Are
yeah,
we stretching the company? Are we provoking the company? Not in an arrogant way, not in a sort of a we know better way, because that's not the way I would ever dream it to be, but more in a way of, are we creating a safe environment of that allows for really good creative tension to exist? And are we creating a safe environment for people to explore, to fail, and not feel like failure is a bad thing, but to learn from those failures and get to better things? So I think that the trajectory's still got ways to go, because I think it's how can design keep pushing? How can design keep that creative tension? But how do we also? I mean, I talk about me getting out of the way, but how do we get to a place where, in some ways, design gets out of the way, and the whole company is striving for that creative tension and that challenge? Because I think when you get to that place, you've embedded creativity, you've embedded obsession with the consumer into the DNA and the culture of the company, and that's when I think you can get these huge step changes in the company. And
yeah,
in some ways, I mean, we all have our opinions about Apple, but I think Apple's got to that place where employees go to Apple and there's an expectation of greatness, there's an expectation of quality, there's an expectation of great design. So be it an engineer, be it someone in customer service, they're all pushing for this. This isn't the Apple standard. How do we keep raising the bar? And I kind of would like to Logitech to not be Apple, but have that same sort of embedded state within everyone in the company.
yeah, 100%. Um, what about functional design? So you mentioned you get out of the way normally in the day to day, but does the buck stop with you? Or are you the decider of product designs and kind of pushing that forward? Or maybe talk about what are the major things you're thinking about, you and the team, and not just the design team, but the product organization as a whole? Like, what are you thinking about when designing new products? And what's that just overall design process look like?
So, so on the deciding design side of things, I do my absolute hardest not to be the one that decides on design. In fact, if I have to make a decision on the design, I failed my team in some respects. Um, I I think it's, for me, it's not about me making a decision on the design. It's actually trying to empower design decisions down into the organization. I think you only grow as a designer when you're making those decisions and feeling the everyday responsibility of making those decisions. I think that said, as a design team, what we try and do, and and there's still room for improvement, is we have weekly reviews where the design leadership are invited to be presented or be sorry, they're invited to critique work from other design teams within Logitech, and they're there not to sort of critique it with a view of, I like this design, I like that design, I think you should do this, but more of a challenging sort of asking questions and just stretching the thinking of the team, with a view that they hear us, they listen, but it's about them taking away that information and working out what it means, have they left gaps, how to work with it. And then ultimately the design decisions are made by the head of design within each of those business groups, alongside the leadership within the business group. Um, so, and I think that's important. For me, it's important that, A, I mean, it's important for many reasons, actually. I mean, it's important because we do so many products. If I had to make decisions, I would be the bottleneck and I would cripple the process. So it just doesn't work. And B, I strongly believe in actually people owning their product and owning their design, and trying to help them make the decision and help the team make the decision versus us trying to make the decision. The other part of the question you talked about was process and things we're thinking about.
How do you guys work to kind of take something from ideation through to prototype to finished product?
Yeah.
And then I guess to expand on that, like, it'd be great to think about, like, how do you guys approach, incorporating diversity, like hand size or gender or locality, or how do you design for sustainability, like all these kind of things that we're thinking about in this day and age.
It's
how's
a
the
great
sausage
question.
made?
It's a great question. So, I mean, on a very, very highest level, in a very simplistic level, shall we say, we have what's called the Logitech playbook, and when it was first defined, it was defined with defined with a very clear view that this isn't a design process. This is a shared innovation process. This is a process which is design, engineering, business all working together. And we've evolved it as time has gone, and maybe in some cases we've not evolved it enough and fast enough in some places, but fundamentally it's broken down into, I don't know, 5 phases, I guess. The first phase is really about framing opportunity and identifying opportunity. The next phase is about taking the opportunity and trying to explore it, tease out, and put a vision around it. And that when we do that vision could lead to a number of products, or a singular product, or a service, or some software. And then the vision then moves on to what we would call then a much more of a detailed hardcore gating process. And that's when, sort of, in simple terms, the rubber does hit the road, because the investment starts to go up dramatically as we go from a hypothesis to renderings to prototypes to actually, prototypes as far as experienced prototypes, to real prototypes, and then all the way down to manufacturing. I think and I'll come back to the sustainability and diversity in a second. And one of the things that we're trying to do is, in those first 2 phases, to try and do more and more prototyping, more and more consumer understanding, consumer insight, listening to the consumer, but testing ideas with consumers, listening to how ideas resonate, and almost, I wouldn't say co-creating to the fullest extent, but sort of taking elements and feedback and going, okay, how can we improve the product? How does this change our thinking? So we're fine-tuning the prototype and the thinking before the investment starts to really kick in. As far as diversity is concerned, if I'm totally honest, I don't think we've done enough in the past, and it's not because of it's not for no other reason than it's just been a historical, in some respects, blind spot of, we always make products this size, we always do products like this because that's how we've always done them and that's how they've always been successful. And I think it's not until lately that we've really dialed up a much higher degree of awareness and recognition that the whole world uses our products, and the whole world has different needs, and the whole world has different hand sizes, or there's different nuances and preferences based on gender, culture. So we've really been, in the last year and a half, 2 years, really been dialing up, or maybe even longer than that, but dialing up a much greater sense of understanding of the individual. And it kind of starts with the brief and that hypothesis of, like, who are we designing this for? Let's not forget who we're designing this for all the way through the process. And if we know who we're designing it for, then let's get people who within that space, and actually talk to them, learn from them, gain the insights, and use them all the way through the process as part of that feedback loop. So we're co-creating and learning all the way through. And then sustainability. Sustainability in my mind is one of those things that is no longer a sort of an option. It's a mandatory requirement. And I think we as a company, and it starts with Bracken and the leadership all the way through of, it's now become part and parcel and core to our strategy in everything we do. In the case of product development, all the way from the very start, all the way through, we have now sustainability measures. So whenever it gets to all of those gates, we're asking the question of, does this meet the sustainability targets for this product? And if it doesn't, go back. You can't pass through this gate. And I think that's, just to build on that, one of the nice things, one of the great things rather, of the fact that we're putting a sort of carbon impact onto our packaging. I hope it sets a standard and shows the way for other companies to do it, which would be fantastic. But equally, it holds us accountable to ourselves to say, if the past mouse had a carbon impact of X, the next mouse after it has to have a carbon impact less than that. Otherwise, we are not improving as a company. We're not moving the needle for ourselves as a company. So it's so many dimensions to the question of the process.
Sure.
And then I think on the sustainability, I think maybe the other thing that's probably worth talking about is we obviously look at sustainability from a product point of view, but we also have just a huge amount of people in the background who are looking at all new dimensions of sustainability to make sure we are developing ingredients for the future. So looking at battery technology, PCB technology, new material technology. So the next generation and the generation after that, we have better materials coming in, which can improve the sustainability. And then on top of that, as a layer, we also have initiatives in place where we're looking at not just improving the product per se, but completely rethinking the business model and completely rethinking the relationship that the consumer has with the product. Is it about repairing? Is it about modularity and reuse? Is it where we take back products and refurbish them? I think there's so many new sort of business models that we need to be thinking about, which hopefully change the relationship that people have with our product, but also become economically viable for us to grow the company as well.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's such an important topic, and it sounds like you guys have a great head start. I think everyone's headed in that direction. So I saw you guys were on Fast Company's top 10 most innovative companies in design, I think a couple times, right? 2 or 3 times. What makes an award-winning design company? What does this look like to you, and what does this mean for you?
I think what well, I'll answer the question in two dimensions of the question. I think what makes an award-winning design company, and I think I've touched on it already, but fundamentally it's people.
Yeah.
And you could kind of break that down into 3 dimensions: obsession with people, i.e., obsession with the people that you're designing for. As a designers, I think, and I've been guilty, but as designers, we often fall into the trap of designing for ourselves and not actually realizing we're designing for somebody else. I think so. It's one is the obsession with the people and who you're designing for, and making sure that it's generally improving their lives and is better for them. I think the second is the culture, and creating the right culture for people to do great work. I think, again, that's where Bracken has set the tone in Logitech of establishing an amazing culture where we encourage people to speak up, to challenge. It's a safe environment to make mistakes, and there's a high degree of trust. And then last but not least, certainly from my perspective, it's super talented people. You're only as good as your team. You're only as good as the people in your design organization. So it's fostering great talent and giving them the space to do amazing work. So I think that's ultimately where I would say is the highest focus of what makes a great design or an award-winning capability. And then as the awards, it's an interesting one. I'm not a huge advocate for awards, actually.
It's a pretty cool one, though.
No, it's good. Don't get me wrong, it's good. But it's maybe me that sort of is the I'm not very good in the limelight, shall we say? I mean, even doing this is kind of a challenge for me to a certain extent. I think awards are great, but there's an element sometimes that awards are self-serving, and the process is a little bit sometimes hokey. but nonetheless, Bracken and I, when we started this journey, we did talk a lot about awards and the value of awards, and we made a huge commitment to submitting and trying to win awards, and we did it for many reasons. But I think the simple reasons were it helped us have a measure of success year on year. Of like, okay, we won 4 awards in the first year. Oh, we won 10 years the year after, and now we're up at, I don't know how many awards we win on a yearly basis. It's maybe in the 20s and 30s. So I think it was important for that because it showed progress, and it showed progress from a design point of view, but it showed progress culturally in Logitech of investing in design. It was also a good, not just a good, it was a great indication to the external design community that Logitech was committed. Which opened doors for us. If I'm being honest about it, it attracted talent to come to work for Logitech, but it also opened doors and allowed us to have conversations amongst the design community, and I think that's been incredibly useful. So yeah, it's good. It is nice, but it's. I think you always have to be careful to just keep a sense of humility that they are just awards. Fundamentally,
plaque aside, I mean, I think
but
you guys are doing some innovative stuff, and it's
I agree. I mean, fundamentally, and this is one of those things that I think that it's nice to give you recognition from your peers. It really is. But I want to instill into my team the importance, really, that first and foremost, as a design team, you're there to grow the business. You're there to be part of the business. You're there to make great products and great experiences for the company. And I think sometimes that might not mean award winning in the same sense as what it might mean commercially. And I think getting that balance is sometimes a fine line.
Yeah, for sure. Generally, what does the future look like for design awareness and innovation within companies, just from like a macro lens, regardless of industry? The design is kind of in this golden age right now. What's your take?
I think we're on the brink of we're already there, but I think I don't think we're truly seeing it and feeling it and changing the way we design enough yet. But we're seeing kind of the new era of artificial intelligence, machine learning, designing with data, robotics, nanotechnology. There's a whole slew of new technologies coming, which is on one level is how do we design for those, but actually I think there's also how do we as a design community use those tools to do better design. And I don't think we're seeing that come through yet. I mean, we are in pockets, but I don't think we're seeing that come through yet. I'd also like to see how colleges who are teaching the next generation of students, how the next generation of designers start to use these tools to potentially design differently. That's probably what excites me the most, of how design's almost entering a new revolution. And in some respects, I mean, I'm being sort of super simplistic, but I was at the cusp of a generation which never used computers. I was at a cusp of a generation which used markers and pencil, and even in the early days of modeling, you would take thin cuts and you would scan them on a scanner and build up things without doing 3D modeling. And then we've gone through 30 years of 3D modeling, computers, and we've mastered the art of using the computer. Now it's how do we master the art of using intelligence? And I think that's a new type of design that's coming. And I have to say, it's going to be exciting, nerve-wracking for someone like me, but I think that's going to be super important for the design community.
I think the other thing that's changing design is just the way that we all work, right? We're moving into this hybrid world. We've been here now for a couple of years now, right? Almost, where people are working from home, and that's obviously going to change the way that we work. How are you guys thinking about that evolution in terms of designing products for?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think in some ways we as a company had a view and a vision that we as I don't want to say workers, but we as people were going to start using video more. And this was pre-COVID, and we were obviously pushing video conferencing, video collaboration very aggressively. And obviously, COVID was just a huge accelerator of the use of video. I mean, even this we're doing now, I'm not sure what it. I mean, they did exist, but it's become a sort of a part of our everyday of how we talk, communicate, share ideas.
Yeah.
So I think COVID was a huge accelerator for us, but it's fundamentally changed our behaviors as individuals of how we think about work, how we do work. So I think we will continue to sort of be leveraging that acceleration is probably the best way to look at it. But I think we also are acutely aware, and I speak for myself, and I'm sure I speak for everybody online, even though we spent the last 20 months working from home, we're all desperate to get back to working with people in the real life. So I think as the pendulum, and I don't think the pendulum will swing back, but as the pendulum sort of does a bit of a reset, I think we're going to adopt some of the old behaviors, hopefully massively adopt some of these new behaviors, and create new ways of working. And in the short term, that may be video tools as we know them today, and tools like the keyboards, the mice, etc., that we know them. But in some respects, part of me would like to sort of almost do it for the intellectual reasons more than maybe the real. I hope it never happens in some ways, but intellectually, I would like to almost say, how would we work if we carried on working like this as it is in COVID? Because I think it teases out collaboration and teases out the tools much more if we put ourselves in that extreme position of what would it mean if this was that end state of how we were working, and how would we find the tools and the ways to replicate working from home but being in real life? So how could I get the tools so you and I weren't doing this on two screens, but actually there was a holograph of you, or the I mean, it's kind of the meta that Facebook and Microsoft have all been talking about, but I think that those are all that living in the meta as kind of as sometimes painful as it sounds, there is a degree of reality that we're heading towards that.
Yeah. I mean, in some degrees we already are. We're communicating across a wire. Okay, well, I want to just check time real quick. I want to make sure that we have some time for some Q&A from the audience. Let me just check in with Madeline. Should we bring up some questions?
How do the questions come up? Okay.
Hi, how are you?
Hello.
Hi, Mercedes.
Nice to meet you guys. Well, I am a huge fan of Logitech and Dribbble, as you can see. And I'm really excited for the play of you have ongoing. I was one of the winners of last year play of you had, and it was great. It also connected me with Logitech, and one of my highlights of last year was that I became part of the Defy Logic campaign, and it was awesome how everything turned out. And on that note, I want to ask you, what was the project you were most proud of in the last year or so?
So sorry, Mercedes. What was the most?
The project that you are the most proud of.
That's a great question. There's so many big ones and small ones, and for different reasons. I mean, some it's the individual, the development of the individual. Some it's the impact of the company. On one, I mean, I've got a few examples maybe. One was in the packaging team. And this might seem really small and inconsequential, but it's a huge thing in many ways. Is a lot of our products hang on the shelf, and it's a little plastic. I'm sure you can go to any shop and you see all these old products hanging on the shelf, and it's a little plastic hang tag that helps it hang on there. And the team developed an alternate to plastic, which was a biodegradable version. So something like that for me was just I love innovation like that, because it's not glamorous design per se, but it's real meaningful innovation. So creating a biodegradable paper-based hang tag, amazing. And it's not, this isn't staged, just for everybody's benefit, just isn't staged, but we launched these products today. Oops, that way around. Oops.
Oh my God, so cute.
So we launched these products today, and honestly, it's not staged. It's purely by chance. But the Logitech Pop keyboard and Pop mouse, I'm super proud of that for two reasons. One, it's the team. This was done by a team in Taiwan exclusively. All of the design work was done by the team in Taiwan, and historically, the team in Taiwan over the years has been much more of an executional team versus a driving innovation and future thinking. So for them to switch gears and drive something so important for the company, it's just a huge change, and I'm super proud of the journey they've been on. It's also a product which we've, in some respects, has challenged internally Logitech, because it's less of a business-driven keyboard and mouse solution. It was being driven by really truly trying to understand Gen A, Gen Z, and thinking about that culture versus the culture of the businessman. So it's got emoji keys, it's more playful, just the whole thing was just, it's for so many levels. I love that product. And then there's a product at the moment which is a long way from coming out, but I kind of geek out on it because it's a product, and I can't say much about it, to be fair, but it's a product where the team have got virtually no money to make it, and it's for a vast range of consumers, and I think it's so incredibly highly constrained, it almost feels impossible. And I love projects like that because it forces you as an individual, but it forces the team to really think outside the box and stretch themselves. And I think that's when you get new breakthroughs in aesthetics, you get new breakthroughs in thinking when you get that type of highly constrained product. So I'm looking forward to that one as well. But and there's tons more, but I probably shouldn't say any more.
That was awesome. Thank you. I cannot wait for this new keyboard. The sneak peek I just had looked amazing. And thank you for the amazing. Yeah. Oh my God. It's amazing. And you are very inspiring to me. So thank you for sharing all your knowledge in this chat.
Thank you, Mercedes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right, who's next? Here's a question, a written one. What are good tools in convincing a company higher ups that design matters and is worthy of the investment when that hasn't been an important element in the past? So how do we get design a seat at the table?
It's that's almost I'm not sure that's an easy question to answer, because it's you could be speaking to someone who doesn't believe and may never believe. I mean, I look at in my case, and I know I am luckier than most of my peers because I have Bracken as a CEO, and not only does Bracken believe in design and is a huge supporter of design, but he intuitively gets design, and that sounds wrong, but I often I found that when you're talking and you're sharing new ideas and new thinking, you have to get a really high degree of fidelity for people to see it. Mm-hmm. And in Bracken's case, it could be a simple gesture or a simple sort of statement, and he has that sort of ability to see the design. So that's been just unbelievable for me and for the team, because it's just helped set the tone in the company. I think if you're working for a company where there is that not that level of appreciation or understanding of the value of design, it's a tricky one. I think you kind of have to, in some respects, well, I don't know, but it's a tough one. If you can get a seat at the table to have the conversation, I think you have to break it down quite quite sort of rationally and quite data driven. And like Zach was talking about earlier, if we talk about 200% versus the ones that don't invest in design, and try and talk to the rational side of the individual and say, look, forget the emotional part of design. Let's talk about the rational value of why design adds value, and then build back from there.
I agree with that. I think that there needs to be a kind of a marriage of right and left brain to get everyone who's sitting at that table to really understand the impact. But like you said earlier, it all comes back to the customer experience, right? And I think, as companies look to differentiate these days, it's who's making the better user experience wins.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, and I've been guilty of this as well as a designer. You kind of like, you don't get angry, but you get frustrated that they don't understand. Excuse me. And it's really not for them to come to you to understand. It's about for you to go to them to convince them. Yeah. It's about, and I think this is where I think maybe designers are missing an opportunity to maybe understand the language of business. I think if a designer can understand the language of business, you can talk to the higher ups, as it's listed in here, and talk to management in their language and in their terms, and versus sort of sometimes designers are seen as too emotional and too creative. I think if you can understand that we all speak different languages, and learn to speak that language, you have far more impact and influence.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. Here's one. Abdullah, what is the key challenge in rebranding?
Well, in Logitech's case, I mean, that's a big question if you start going broad, but I'll just stick to Logitech. In Logitech's case, I mean, it was something that Bracken and I talked about in the early days of, does the Logitech brand feel appropriate to where we wanted to take it? And I think we both knew that the Logitech brand was visually looking a little bit tired and a little bit dated. And even the word may have not been appropriate. But in the early days, we sort of said, look, it would seem wrong to rebrand ourselves before we had something of value to rebrand ourselves around. So we focused in the early days about making just great products. It's okay, let's put great product back onto the table. Let's put great designs back into Logitech. Then when we have those great designs, let's look about rebranding the company. So when we come out with that rebranding, it feels appropriate to the portfolio which we were starting to bring out. And so it felt, back when we did it, it felt natural versus forced. Yeah. We talked about taking away the tech and just having Logi, and that's what we eventually landed on, that as far as what we print on our products. It just says Logi, even though we are Logitech. Yeah. But it's a trick. I think every company is different, and the dynamics of every company is different. In our case, it was all about making sure the timing was right, and the timing was there. We had the support of the leadership. We had the support of the founders and a lot of the old original incumbents of the company. So it was not a hard sell. It was almost a natural sort of just flow for the company.
What was the time period on that, start to finish? How long did that take?
We did it 2.5 years into me joining, and we did it incredibly quickly. We didn't do it by the book. We kind of said, let's get to a place where it feels right, and then let's just go. Yeah. Which is, every branding expert will probably tell you that's the wrong way to do it. No, but we kind of said, look, let's just go with it. We'll make mistakes. Let's adjust and learn, but let's just roll out the new brand.
Yeah, awesome.
There's a ton of questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure we'll get to them in the short amount of time left.
Coming on stage real quick here. Kyle, how's it going?
Hey, good. Good to talk to you guys, and I'm happy to join this. I came a little late, but I wanted to ask Alastair. So I work for a company that's doing pretty innovative medical device technology that's going to be coming on the market, and being the fact that it's like so disruptive in a way, we're facing a challenge with like, disrupting the current mental model of things, and for it to be, adopted into both like the medical world and potentially the consumer world. So that's a challenge that we're facing. And I'm curious if you have any experience at Logitech that was similar, where you were introducing something that was so different that it took some coaxing or some marketing or some clever work to just get the general public to adopt it.
They just launched an emoji keyboard, so
yeah. It's nice to meet you, Kyle.
Exactly. Nice to meet you.
It's a good question. I mean, we don't necessarily talk about it as in a sort of maybe in such simple black and white terms, but I think I think when for Logitech, when we're launching a new keyboard and we're launching a new mouse, I'm being super oversimplistic, but they are, in some respects, they're known behaviors. We know what a mouse and a keyboard is, so it's an easy step for the consumer to get there when we're introducing new dimensions to a keyboard and a mouse. I think when you're introducing something that's behaviorally different to something you've used in the past, I don't know. I think there's maybe there's probably multiple dimensions to it, but I think one is it fundamentally so much easier to use and better that it's almost like that sort of why haven't we been doing this why haven't we done this before? And those are the easy ones because consumers get there quickly, and they almost make the jump for you. And I think in some respects the iPhone was a good example of that, of like when you first used it, it was like, well, I can pinch and zoom, I can do all these things really easily. I think when you're introducing new behaviors which are different, and it's harder to have that sort of why have we done it like this, I think that's where you do need to look a lot at how do you market the product and make sure that you tell the story and bring the consumer along the journey. And those are the ones where, as a company, I think you have to look at the marketing expenditure and go, this is going to take a lot more heavy lifting to tell the story, to bring the consumer into this and get them to believe and get them to adopt. So it's hard to know the exact circumstance of your product per se, but it sounds like there needs to be a significant level of marketing investment to work out how to attract the consumer, seduce the consumer, convince them it's a good solution, and get them to try it, and then get them to be the ambassadors, get them to be the people that give you the reviews, give you the sort of the yes, I believe because other people are using this. I mean, we as consumers are now become attuned to 5-star reviews, and we're believe in the consumer reviews more than we do sometimes anything else. So how do you get that to get the consumers to believe?
Right, that's good. Yeah, I think that's really what it does come down to is, the public, talking about and just catching up to where technology is, and needing it, in their life. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Cal.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, it looks like we're just at time. Madeline, any more questions, or looks like we're.
Hey guys, thank you. We do have a lot of questions in the chat, but nobody else wanting to come up onto stage. So we are at that hour mark, so can wrap up.
All right. Well, Alastair, thanks so much for coming on. This was awesome.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Zax. Thank you so much, Alastair. That was a really interesting conversation.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for joining.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you for your spirited interaction in the chat. Thank you for all those questions that you put in the question and answer. Sorry that we couldn't get to all of them, but I thought it was really insightful, the questions that we did get to. Also, thank you to Mercedes and Carl for being so brave to come up onto stage and ask your question face to face. That was really exciting. So this session has been recorded. We'll send you a link to the recording after after this. And I also wanted to shout out that Logitech has a new product, MX Keys Mini Keyboard. So they've just launched it, and I'll send a link around to you guys afterwards for that as well. And also, please do participate in the Logitech Playoff. They're doing the biggest ever design playoff, and the design hint is smaller, smarter, and mightier. So please do check that out as well. Thank you everyone so much for coming. Keep an eye on dribbble.com/learn for any future events that we're doing. We've got a couple before the end of the year. And a massive thank you to Alastair and Zach. See you soon.